Hello, everybody. Today I want to talk about a war that is not highlighted in the mainstream media at all. In fact, I would say it's not even highlighted in many alternative medias at all. Very little information is sipping out about the war in the DRC, that is to say, the Democratic Republic of Congo. So stay tuned and let's go through this conflict. One of the deadliest conflicts in the world is currently unfolding in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC. This conflict rarely receives attention in mainstream media and is often overlooked. However, the DRC supplies the world with critical metals such as cobalt, essential for our electronic devices. Given the millions of people displaced or killed, it is imperative to seek justice and raise awareness about this crisis. Although my contribution may be small, I believe I can shed light on this conflict through writing and creating a video about it. More people need to be aware of this tragic war as we are benefiting from it. Our smartphones, cars, airplanes, and flat screen TVs function because of resources extracted at a great human cost in Congo. It's time to bring this issue to the forefront of our collective consciousness. To truly understand the Democratic Republic of Congo, it is essential to explore the country's history and demographics from the pre-colonial era to the present day. The DRC is home to over 250 ethnic groups and 450 tribes, also known as ethnic subgroups. These groups come from 5 major linguistic families: Bantu, Sudanic, Niloitic, Ubangian, and the Pygmy. Unlike many countries, there is no single dominant ethnic group in the Congo. Instead, a mosaic of cultures coexists, each contributing to the nation's identity. Let's explore the largest ethnic groups that collectively account for 51.5% of the population. We begin with the Luba Kasai, one of the most prominent groups. Next, we have the Congo people, followed by the Mongo, Lubakat, Lulua, and Tetela. The Nande, Ngambandi, Ngombe, Yaka, and Ngabaka complete this list. These groups are just the beginning. The Bantu peoples form the largest linguistic group in the DRC, including various subgroups such as the Ambala, Ambun, Babindi, Bangala, Bemba, and many more. Central Sudanic peoples like the Manvu, Mbunja, and Moru Mangbetu add to the diversity, alongside Niloitic peoples including the Alur, Bari, and Logo. The Ubangian linguistic group features the Azande, Banda, Ngambandi, and Ngambaka. Additionally, the Fulani, specifically the Mbororo, are part of the nation's cultural mosaic. One of the most unique groups are the Pygmy peoples, including the Mbuti, Twa, Baka, and Babinga. They are known for their profound knowledge of the forest and their traditional way of life. The Democratic Republic of Congo's strength lies in its diversity. Each group, with its customs, languages, and traditions, weaves together to form the vibrant cultural fabric of the nation. What makes Congo so attractive is its mineral resources. So the Democratic Republic of Congo, the DRC, is extremely rich in mineral resources, with mining accounting for nearly 90% of its total exports. The vast mineral deposits in the Katanga province were a major factor attracting European powers to the Congo in the 19th century. Key minerals found in Katanga include copper, cobalt, zinc, cassiterite, which is a chief source of metallic tin, manganese, coal, silver, cadmium, germanium, used as a semiconductor. There's gold, palladium, which is used as a catalyst and in alloys, uranium, platinum, and other mineral resources across the DRC. You can find, for example, in the west of Lake Kivu, you have casterite. Sorry if I butchered that. You have columbatantalite, wolframite, which is a source of tungstone, beryl, gold, monazite, phosphate of cerium metals, and thorium. In Lake Kivu, you can find methane, carbonic, and nitrogen natural gases. In south central Congo, you find iron ore, gem quality diamonds. In the central regions, you find industrial diamonds. In the northeast of the country, you find gold, coal, iron ore deposits. And in the northwest, you can find prospective deposits of gold, monazite, and diamonds. Coastal Congo contains or have a lot of bauxite, gold, offshore petroleum deposits. Limestone is also common and is among the richest. It has among the richest deposits in Africa, and you can find that throughout the country. So let's talk about the landscape of the DRC. Forests cover more than half of the country, making them some of the largest in Africa. Wild game from these forests supplements the local diet and plays a significant role in local commerce. So there's a lot of hydroelectric potential in the country as well. The DRC's hydroelectric resources are estimated to make up about 1/8 of the global capacity and potentially half of Africa's total capacity. This immense potential is due to the many rapids along the Congo River system. Then you have thermal energy, which can be sourced from the forests, coal, and petroleum deposits. You also have a lot of fish and agriculture, water resources. The country's rivers, lakes, swamps, and coastal areas contain vast reserves of fish, contributing significantly to the local diet and economy. This comprehensive overview highlights the significant economic potential of the DRC's natural resources, which are central to its economy and crucial for its development. In this segment of the video, I would like to talk about the Congo Kingdom, the Luba and Lunda empires. Established in the 14th century, the Kingdom of Congo was a Bantu kingdom that flourished for centuries with immense wealth and influence. But like many great empires, it faced conflicts and internal divisions that ultimately led to its downfall in the 20th century. According to traditional accounts, the Congo Kingdom was founded around 1390 by Lukeni Luanimi. However, some historians argue it was established in the 15th century around the time Portuguese explorer Diego Cao arrived at the Congo River's mouth in 1484. Diego Cao's arrival marked the beginning of the Kingdom of Congo's interactions with European powers, which would profoundly impact its history. The Bakongo people originally inhabited a narrow region south of the Congo River from modern-day Kinshasa to the port city of Matadi in the lower Congo. Over time, the kingdom expanded its territory through conquests and treaties, incorporating neighboring tribes such as the Bambata, Mayumbe, Basolongo, Kakongo, Basundi, and Babuende. By the 16th century, the Kingdom of Congo had reached its zenith. Its territory spanned over 600 kilometers, extending to the Kwango River in the east and Dande River in the south and the Kwilu River in the north. During this golden age, the kingdom's population exceeded 2 million people. Imagine the vibrant culture, thriving economy, and complex society that existed in this vast territory. But like many powerful kingdoms, the Congo faced challenges. Conflicts with Portugal and internal strife gradually weakened its structure. These issues, coupled with external pressures, eventually led to the kingdom's collapse in the 20th century. Despite its decline, the legacy of the Kingdom of Congo remains a testament to the rich history and cultural heritage of the region. Its story is a fascinating chapter in the history of Africa. The Congo Empire's economy was a bustling hub of regional trade. They traded copper, ivory, salt, cattle, hides, and slaves along the Congo River. But that's not all. The kingdom had a thriving local production sector. Weavers crafted renowned raffia fabrics. Potters created beautiful ceramics, and metalworkers produced intricate tools and ornaments. The Kingdom of Congo was governed by a single monarch, known as the Manikongo. The Manikongo appointed governors to manage different regions within the territory. These governors collected tributes like millet, ivory, palm wine, and wild animal skins. They presented these tributes during lavish annual ceremonies in Mbanza, Congo, the kingdom's capital. To enforce their authority, the Manikongos commanded an army of up to 20,000 slaves in the 16th century. The arrival of the Portuguese in the late 15th century further boosted Congo's economy, especially the slave trade. The Portuguese exchanged goods like cotton clothing, silk, glazed china, and glass beads for the Bakongo's abundant supply of slaves. Alfonso I, also known as the Apostle of Congo, made Christianity a cornerstone of Congo society. Under his rule, the Bakongo became the first sub-Saharan African people to embrace Christianity, adopting their version of Roman Catholicism. In 1512, Alfonso I of Congo formalized strong diplomatic relations with Portugal through the Regimento Agreement with King Manuel I. This agreement saw Congo accepting Portuguese institutions, granting extraterritorial rights to Portuguese subjects, and supplying slaves to Portuguese traders. Alfonso I also expanded Congo's territory and centralized its administration. However, by 1526, the relationship soared when Alfonso discovered that Portuguese merchants were illegally exporting enslaved individuals beyond the legal confines of prisoners of war or those unable to pay their debts. To address this, Alfonso established an administrative system to supervise the slave trade, although he struggled to limit Portuguese interactions to his kingdom alone. Towards the end of Alfonso's reign in 1542, succession disputes arose, leading to significant political maneuvers and even assassination attempt on his life by the Portuguese. After Afonso's death, ongoing disputes over the Manikongo succession led to the kingdom's division into rival factions. In 1568, the kingdom faced an invasion by rival warriors from the east known as the Jagas. Alvaro I Nimi a Luceni restored the kingdom with Portuguese assistance, allowing the Portuguese to settle in Luanda, part of Congo territory, and later established a colony of Angola. Relations between Angola and Congo deteriorated when Angola's governor briefly invaded Congo in 1622. From 1641 to 1648, the ruling Manikongo Garcia II Ankanga a Luceni allied with the Dutch to seize parts of Angola from the Portuguese. This conflict culminated in the Battle of Mbavila on October 29, 1665, where the Portuguese emerged victorious and decapitated the reigning Manikongo Antonio I Mvita a Nkanga. Following the Battle of Mbawila, the unified Kingdom of Congo effectively ceased to exist. Two rival factions, the Kimpanzu and Kinzala, contested the kingship. igniting a civil war that devastated the countryside and resulted in the sale of thousands of Bakongo into the transatlantic slave trade. The rival factions established semi independent bases and agreed to rotate the kingship, a system initiated by Pedro IV Agua Rosada Nsambu a Mvemba. Despite efforts to maintain stability, smaller scale factional disputes continued to weaken the monarchy. Portugal intervened to resolve a succession dispute following the death of Henrique II Mpanzu a Nzindi. This intervention led to the installation of Pedro V Agua Rosado Lelo in 1859, who later ceded his territory to become part of Portugal's Angola in exchange for increased royal powers over outlying areas. The final event leading to the collapse of the Congo Kingdom was the revolt led by Alvaro Buta against Portuguese rule in 1913 to 1914. The revolt was suppressed and the kingdom was fully absorbed into Angola. After the kingdom's integration into Angola, efforts to revive Congo nationalism and culture emerged. In 1921, Simon Kimbangu initiated the Kimbanguism movement, which became a platform for anti-colonial sentiments in the Belgian Congo, now DRC. Though King Kimbangu was arrested and sentenced to life imprisonment, his legacy endured as Kimbanguism gained legal recognition and remains influential today. European historians like Georges Blandier and Father Van Ving helped uncover Congo's illustrious history. Their work inspired Bakongo intellectuals to demand independence from Belgium, leading to the election of President Joseph Kasavubu in 1960, the first president of independent DRC. Today, the Bakongo are the largest ethnic group in the Republic of Congo and the third largest in Angola. Mbanza Congo remains significant as the capital of Angola's northwestern Zaire province and was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2017. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the interior of Central Africa witnessed significant growth due to the introduction of imported crops, new technologies, and innovative leadership models. These elements fostered strong centralized governments that subdued neighboring chiefdoms, regulated trade routes, and enhanced the region's wealth and stability. Through warfare and strategic alliances, these powerful empires integrated client states, spreading their political systems and courtly traditions. Art forms and insignia associated with imperial rule proliferated throughout the area, reflecting the influence of these dominant states. The emergence of the Luba and Lunda empires in the 17th century significantly influenced the political and artistic practices in the Central African savanna. The Luba Empire, known for its resilient form of governance, expanded by effectively navigating succession disputes and integrating foreign leaders and governments. Rooted in sacred kingship known as Balopwe and ruled by council, the Luba model of statecraft was adopted by the Lunda. This governance model disseminated throughout what is now northern Angola, northwestern Zambia, and southern Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Lunda Empire's adoption of the Luba governance model further spread these political and artistic practices across Central Africa. This cross-cultural exchange fostered a rich tapestry of traditions that influenced local customs and courtly traditions. Art forms and insignia associated with imperial rule became symbols of power and authority, further cementing the influence of these empires on the region. The integration of client states into these empires ensured the proliferation of these cultural elements. The dynastic rulers of the Luba Empire traced their lineage to the legendary figure Kalala Lunga, a hunter credited with overthrowing the despotic ruler in Congolo and introducing fundamental aspects of Luba culture. Upon their deaths, Luba kings achieved divine status, transforming their ruling villages into living shrines dedicated to their legacies. These landmarks dotted the heartland of Luba. Official men of memory from the Mbuduye Association maintained oral histories associated with these sites and interpreted historical precedents for the community and current rulers. The prestige of this revered lineage of sacred kings was immense, leading rulers of smaller neighboring chiefdoms to eagerly align themselves with Luba culture. In exchange for tributes in goods and labor, these less powerful rulers were integrated into the royal lineage and adopted the sacred Luba ancestors as their own. Luba courtly traditions, including artistic styles and sculptural forms, spread to client states. Kalala Lunga is credited with introducing advanced iron forging techniques to the Luba people, symbolized by skillfully crafted iron axes and spears, important symbols of authority in the Luba Empire. An example is an axe from the museum's collection, likely originating from one of the neighboring Songye chiefdoms that bordered Luba territory. The curved design and intricate details of the iron blade complement a handle adorned with copper sheets, a precious metal sourced from the Zambezi River's headwaters far to the south. Central to Luba leadership arts were Mwandi, female embodiments of ancestral kings, staffs, headrests, bow stands, and royal seats featuring these motifs represented the divine status of the ruler and the refined elegance of their court. One of the most significant states to adopt elements of Luba culture was the Lunda Empire to the south. According to Lunda creation myths, a Luba hunter named Chibinda Lunga introduced the Luba model of governance to the Lunda around 1600, when he married a local princess and gained control of her kingdom. While most rulers claiming descent from Luba ancestors integrated into the Luba Empire, Lunda kings maintained a distinct identity and expanded their political and economic dominance across the region. By 1650, ruler Mwant Yav Nawij, sorry if I butchered that, had established trade routes from his capital to the Atlantic coast and initiated direct contact with European traders seeking slaves and forest products. By the late 17th century, Lunda outposts in present-day eastern Angola controlled the regional copper trade, while settlements around Lake Mweru, sorry if I butchered that again, regulated commerce from the East African coast. In addition to adopting Luba leadership principles, Lunda rulers also embraced elements of Luba courtly art. Wealthy from trade and tribute, Lunda chiefs commissioned skilled artists from client peoples like the Chokwe to create these forms. Local rulers affirming allegiance to the Lunda Empire also facilitated the spread of these traditions throughout the region. A chief's scepter, carved by an Ovimbundu artisan, exemplifies the wide distribution of Luba/Lunda artistic traditions. The elaborate adornment, expressive eyes, and contemplative expression of the female half-figure atop the scepter echo the Mwadi imagery pervasive in Luba royal art. Now I would like to talk about the Congo Free State under the rule of the Belgian King Leopold II. On June 1st, 1885, King Leopold II awoke in his palace in Laeken as a transformed man. In addition to being the King of Belgium, he had become the owner of a sovereign state, the Congo Free State. This unique state lasted for 23 years until it eventually became a Belgian colony on November 15th, 1908. Initially, Congo was not a colony but a unique state, with Leopold as its absolute ruler despite residing 6,000 kilometers away in Belgium. From his investments in 1885 until his death in 1909, Leopold II never set foot in Congo. Leopold's consolidation of power was gradual and marked by various maneuvers. The European superpowers recognized his control only after the Berlin Conference, where he established himself unequivocally as the ruler of the Congo Free State. He was viewed as a philanthropist with grand ideals and even greater resources. By the late 1900s, Leopold had established no more than 50 outposts to govern an area theoretically as large as the Netherlands. In reality, most of the territory eluded effective control. The discrepancy between theory and practice was evident in the vague borders of Leopold's empire, which often changed. Before the Berlin Conference, this uncertainty was understandable. The first blueprint of the future territory was formed on August 7th, 1884, when Henry Morton Stanley met Leopold in Ostend. They drew a few cursory lines on a rudimentary map, making the process as arbitrary as possible. Bismarck accepted and recognized these borders internationally a few weeks later. However, over the next 20 years, new border disputes arose with France, Britain, and Portugal regarding different regions. Leopold aimed to control the entire eastern region adjacent to his territory, with aspirations to acquire Sudan, Uganda, Eritrea, and even territories outside of Africa. However, none of his expansion plans succeeded. The definitive borders of Congo were established in 1910, but changed again in 1918 and 1927, and even sparked debate in 2007. Today, the Congo Free State is notoriously known for its brutal rule more than its vague borders. The initial 5 years of the Congo Free State were relatively calm. Events unfolded fairly peacefully, with Europeans engaged in the ivory trade along stations established since 1879. However, there were protests against the new rulers in some areas. Resistance was limited to peripheral areas where traditional power structures remained intact and were eventually pacified by force. Leopold invested heavily in developing his state, primarily in new stations to gain a firm grip on the territory. He created conditions for a free market to flourish with the goal of keeping costs low and profits high. Many Congolese, mainly young people and children, were introduced to European lifestyles as domestic servants, Christians, or recruits. They found themselves in homes unlike any they had seen before, wearing clothing and eating food vastly different from their traditional attire. After 1890, the situation deteriorated significantly. Contact with the Free State became synonymous with violence, fear, and death. King Leopold II decided to break his promises of free trade and financial independence from the Belgian state. Leopold declared all unused land and its resources as state property, monopolizing everything. The state assumed control over vast territories, and Leopold's imposition of Western private property concepts sowed seeds of resentment within the Congo Free State. Despite his other broken promises, Leopold upheld his commitment to fight against slavery, namely against the Afro-Arab slave traders such as Msiri, Tiputip, and Al-Zubair, using it as a cover for his expansionist ambitions. Between 1890 and 1892, he incorporated Katanga into his territory, hurrying to outpace British expansion. Leopold's ambitions extended beyond Africa as he eyed territories like the Philippines and parts of China. However, his focus remained on expanding his control in Central Africa. The conflict in East Congo against slave traders was particularly challenging due to their superior arms and knowledge of local warfare. Tiputip, a prominent figure, expressed his frustrations in a letter to Leopold II. "None of the Belgians in Congo likes me, and I can establish that none of them wish me anything good. I am starting to regret that I put myself in the service of Belgium. I can also establish that I am not wanted here. I have also gotten into a quarrel with all the Arabs because I deliver more tusks to the Belgians than them." Economic interests between Europeans and Afro-Arabs from Zanzibar clashed, especially as the supply of elephant tusks dwindled. Between 1891 and 1894, the Force Publique waged the Arab campaigns, leading to the destruction of key trade centers, Nyangwe and Kasongo. This marked the end of the Afro-Arab slave traders' power from Zanzibar. Despite their economic and political strength, their fragmented kingdom couldn't withstand the onslaught. Tipu Tip retired to Zanzibar, but a Muslim minority still exists in Maniema and Kisangani. Economic interests in Congo shifted from elephant tusks to rubber following John Boyd Dunlop's 1888 invention of the inflatable rubber tire. This surge in global demand provided a financial lifeline for King Leopold II, who was nearing bankruptcy. By 1901, rubber extraction in Congo had skyrocketed from a few hundred tons in 1891 to 6,000 tons. Congo transitioned from an economic backwater to a marvel, and Leopold II reaped substantial profits, funding lavish projects in Belgium, including the Jubel Park Museum and the Colonial Museum and Park in Tervuren. However, this prosperity came at a great human cost. Leopold II employed exploitative methods for rubber extraction, focusing on wild rubber rather than plantations. Indigenous populations were forced to extract rubber under brutal conditions. The regional manager assessed quotas, and the Force Publique collected the rubber tax. In concession company territories, armed supervisors terrorized locals to meet quotas. The gruesome practice of cutting off the right hands of victims emerged as a way to account for used ammunition, with hands smoked over fires to prevent rotting. From 1900, photographs of atrocities in Congo began to circulate in Europe, sparking protests. While some misconceptions arose about systematic amputations of living victims, the true scandal was the impunity with which murders were committed. Testimonies like that of Matuli, a 15-year-old girl who witnessed her father's murder and her mother's mutilation, highlighted the brutality. European administrators and African supervisors alike exhibited cruelty, with individuals like René de Parmentier and Léon Vives notorious for their violent expeditions and high rubber yields. Despite formal distancing from these barbaric acts, the Free State lacked effective supervision. Sentences were rare, and officials in Boma knew little of the rainforest atrocities. King Leopold II, despite public indignation, appointed notorious figures like Fieves, indicating systematic violence inherent in the administration. Profit maximization was paramount, pressuring all levels to increase rubber collection and exploitation. The Congo Free State was structured as a pyramid, with King Leopold II at the top, followed by various administrative levels, the Force Publique, and at the bottom, the indigenous people. Clear evidence of abuse emerged from 1900, although initial reports were met with skepticism. Roger Casement's 1904 report revealed that abuse was widespread and not isolated. International pressure on King Leopold II intensified, leading to the decision for Belgium to take over Congo in 1906. Leopold II delayed this by 2 years, requesting to retain a smaller part of Congo. Eventually, he surrendered his project and ordered the destruction of Free State archives. On November 15, 1908, Congo was officially handed over to the Belgian state. Before 1908, the Congo Free State, personally ruled by King Leopold II of Belgium, was infamous for its brutal exploitation and human rights abuses. The Belgian government took control in 1908, supposedly bringing order and stability. This narrative, often repeated in Belgian history, portrays the period between 1908 and 1960 as a calm intermezzo, disrupted only by events in the 1950s. But was it truly peaceful? The Belgian parliament and its people largely overlooked the day-to-day realities in Congo. Power rested mainly in the hands of the ministers for the colonies, while the parliament gave sporadic attention to colonial politics. Despite having institutions like the Colonial Council and Committee for the Protection of Indigenous Populations, these bodies had little real influence. When King Leopold II died in 1909, his successor, King Albert I, adopted a more discreet approach. The governance structure changed with more emphasis on bureaucracy and administrative reforms. The colony's finances were no longer tied to Leopold's personal interests, meaning Congo had to manage its budget independently. Administratively, Congo was divided into provinces, districts, and territories. Territorial administration, often overseeing areas larger than entire Belgian provinces, were responsible for maintaining order and enforcing colonial policies. These administrators reported back to Brussels, though most had little first hand experience in Congo. In the legal system, two courts coexisted: European courts and indigenous courts. The latter were controlled by traditional chiefs but had limited power. Public order was maintained by the Force Publique, a locally recruited army under Belgian command. Science also played a crucial role during this period. The Belgians aimed for scientific colonization, focusing on rigorous planning and research. Tropical medicine became a powerful tool for colonial control, with scientists gaining significant influence over policies. Hospitals were established, but their practices often led to resentment among the Congolese. The Belgian authorities implemented strict controls on movement of the Congolese. By 1910, every indigenous person had to belong to a designated area and needed a health declaration to travel. This policy aimed to control diseases but also restricted the freedom of the Congolese population. World War I saw the Belgian Congo playing a significant role, especially in the Allied campaigns in Africa. Meanwhile, the colony's economy shifted from rubber to minerals like copper, which became a major export, fueling both the war effort and post-war economic booms. The Great Depression of the 1930s hit the export-based economy of the Belgian Congo hard. As international demand for raw materials and agricultural products plummeted, the Congo faced severe economic challenges. For example, the price of peanuts, a key export, collapsed from 1.25 francs to just 25 centimes. In regions like Katanga, the mining sector saw employment decline by staggering 70%. Across the entire country, the wage labor force shrank by 72,000, with many workers returning to their villages. In Leopoldville, the population decreased by 33%, driven by this labor migration. In response to these hardships, the colonial government developed the Indigenous Peasantry Program, aimed at revitalizing the countryside. This initiative sought to build a stronger internal market, less vulnerable to the fluctuations of global demand, and to address the damaging effects of erosion and soil exhaustion caused by mandatory cultivation schemes. After World War II, the colonial state took a more active role in the economic and social development of the Belgian Congo. In 1949, the Belgian government launched an ambitious 10-year plan focused on house building, energy supply, rural development, and healthcare infrastructure. This plan led to a decade of robust economic growth from which the Congolese began to benefit substantially for the first time. During this period, the number of Belgian nationals in the Congo more than doubled, from 39,000 in 1950 to over 88,000 by 1960. This influx reflected the expanding economy and the growing European presence in the colony. In 1953, Belgium granted the Congolese the right to buy and sell private property in their own names for the first time. The 1950s saw the emergence of a modest but steadily growing Congolese middle class in major cities like Leopoldville, Elizabethville, Stanleyville, and Luluabourg. By the late 1950s, rapid political development was underway, driven by growing African aspirations. These tensions and ambitions would soon lead to significant changes, culminating in the 1960 Belgian Congo general election. So I want to dwell into the racial discrimination and racism in the Congo. And if we go back, we can see in the Belgian Congo, there existed what has been termed an implicit apartheid. Though not codified into law, racial restrictions were a daily reality. Congolese city dwellers faced curfews, and de facto segregation shaped their lives. Leopoldville's system of racist curfews, where the black population was restricted to their homes from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m., became a blueprint for other European colonies, including French Equatorial Africa. City centers were initially reserved for the white population, while the black population was organized into cités indígenas, or indigenous neighborhoods. Sorry if I mispronounced that or slaughtered that. Though no laws explicitly barred blacks from establishments frequented by whites, hospitals, department stores, and other facilities were often segregated. In the colonial army, the Force Publique, black soldiers were restricted to the rank of non-commissioned officers, unable to ascend to higher positions. This segregation began to erode only in the 1950s, but even then, Congolese citizens were often treated as second-rate, particularly in political and legal matters. The colonial system in the Belgian Congo was deeply intertwined with the civilizing mission, which aimed to present the colony as a model of benevolent administration. The governance was often described as a colonial trinity, a partnership between the king, the church, and capital. This trinity symbolized the close relationship between state officials, missionaries, and private companies. The paternalistic ideology that underpinned colonial policy was encapsulated in a phrase used by Governor General Pierre Ryckmans: "Dominer pour servir, dominate to serve." The colonial government sought to portray itself as a benevolent force, overseeing a conflict-free and harmonious society. Only in the 1950s did this paternalistic attitude begin to shift. The most blatant discriminatory measures, such as corporal punishment by the feared chicotte, whip, were gradually withdrawn. Following King Baudin's visit to the colony in 1955, Governor General Léon Petillon worked to create a Belgian Congolese community where blacks and whites would be treated as equals. However, despite these changes, significant injustice remained. Anti-miscegenation laws persisted, and between 1959 and 1962, thousands of mixed-race Congolese children were forcibly deported to Belgium by the Belgian government and the Catholic Church. In 1957, a small but significant step was taken when the first municipal elections open to black voters were held in Leopoldville, Elizabethville, and Jadoutville. This marked the beginning of political participation for the Congolese, setting the stage for the significant changes that would follow soon. From the very beginning of colonial rule, Congolese opposition to Belgian control was continuous and multifaceted. As modern ideas and education spread, so did the determination to resist, though early uprisings were often localized and sporadic, such as the Pende Revolt in 1931 and the Lulu Aubourg Mutiny in 1944. They reflected the deep-seated discontent among the Congolese population. Even during what colonial propaganda referred to as Pax Belgica after World War II, passive forms of resistance were widespread. One notable example was Kimbanguism, a religious movement founded by the prophet Simon Kimbangu, which became a symbol of anti-colonial sentiment despite Kimbangu's imprisonment by the Belgian authorities. Resistance wasn't limited to the Congolese alone. Internal criticisms of colonial policies also emerged within the colonial regime itself. As early as the 1920s, some members of the Colonial Council in Brussels, like Octave Levers, sorry if I butchered that, criticized the brutal recruitment methods used by major companies in mining districts. The stagnation of population growth and low birth rates in rural areas, despite advances in combating diseases like sleeping sickness, raised alarms about the long-term effects of forced labor migration and mandatory cultivation policies. Missionaries who were in close contact with Congolese villagers often took up their cause, advocating for their rights in land disputes and other matters. Some missionaries, like Father Gustav Hulstart, played a significant role in preserving Congolese cultural and linguistic traditions. In 1937, Hulstart founded the periodical Equatoria, dedicated to studying the Mongo people of the central Congo basin. After World War II, it became increasingly clear that the Congo could not remain immune to the global wave of decolonization. While the independence of British, French, and Dutch colonies in Asia had little immediate impact on the Congo, pressure on Belgium began to mount, particularly from the United Nations. Belgium had ratified Article 73 of the UN Charter, advocating self determination but resisted reforms in the Congo, viewing external pressure as interference. To placate growing discontent, the colonial government experimented with granting limited rights to select groups of Congolese elites, known as évolués. These individuals could apply for civil merit or immatriculation, which provided them with certain civil rights and recognition of their assimilation into European civilization. However, the stringent conditions and intrusive controls made this policy largely unsuccessful, with only a few thousand Congolese achieving this status by the mid 1950s. In 1955, King Baudouin of Belgium visited the Congo, where he was greeted by enthusiastic crowds of both whites and blacks. His visit was captured in André Cowin's documentary Bwana Kitoko, which highlighted the supposed success of Belgian paternalism. During his visit, Baudouin endorsed the idea of a Belgio-Congolese community, where blacks and whites would be treated as equals. However, his idea faced resistance both in Brussels and among many Belgians in the Congo, who were reluctant to relinquish their privileges. As the 1950s progressed, the Belgian government's lack of long-term strategy for the Congo became increasingly evident. Divisive issues within Belgium, such as the rise of unionism, the demand for public schools to challenge the mission's monopoly on education, and calls for equal treatment of both Belgian national languages, French and Dutch, began to spill over into the Congo. Governor General Petillon feared that these issues would undermine the authority of the colonial government and divert attention from the more pressing need for genuine emancipation of the Congolese people. After World War II, Congolese veterans returned home with new ideas and a growing desire for change. The influence of global events and the inability of the colonial government to implement meaningful reforms led the Congolese elites to begin organizing socially and soon politically. In the 1950s, two distinct forms of nationalism emerged among the Congolese elites. The first was territorial nationalism, which envisioned a united Congo as a single political entity after independence. This movement, to some extent, was tolerated by the Belgian authorities. On the other hand, ethno-religious and regional nationalism gained traction in specific regions like Bakongo, Kasai, and Katanga. The first political organizations to emerge were of this type: ABACO, the Association Culturelle des Bakongo, was founded in 1950 and led by Joseph Kasavubu. Initially a cultural association, ABACO soon turned political and became a vocal opponent of Belgian colonial rule. It also served as the main ethno-religious organization for the Bakongo, closely linked with the Kimbanguist Church. In 1955, Belgian professor Antoine van Bielsen published the 30-year plan for the political emancipation of Belgian Africa. This plan proposed a gradual process of emancipation over 3 decades, giving the Belgian Congo time to develop an educated elite capable of taking over power. However, the plan was met with skepticism. The Belgian government was wary of losing control, while many Congolese évolués felt it extended colonial rule for too long. By 1957, the colonial government attempted a cautious experiment with the first municipal elections in 3 urban centers: Leopoldville, Elizabethville, and Jadoville. For the first time, Congolese people were allowed to stand for office and cast their votes. However, the winds of change were blowing stronger. The independence of Ghana in 1957 and President Charles de Gaulle's visit to Brazzaville in 1958, where he promised African colonies a choice between continued association with France or full independence, ignited the ambitions of the Congolese. These events, along with the World Exhibition in Brussels in 1958, where many Congolese leaders traveled to Belgium for the first time, opened their eyes to the possibilities of independence. In 1958, the call for independence radicalized quickly, with the Mouvement National Congolais, MNC, playing a central role, founded in 1956 and established as a national political party in 1958. The MNC advocated for a united and centralized Congolese nation. Its most influential leader was the charismatic Patrice Lumumba. By 1959, the MNC experienced a split, with Albert Kalonji and others forming a more moderate faction known as the Mouvement National Congolais Kalonji. Despite this division, Lumumba's leftist faction, the Mouvement National Congolais Lumumba, along with MNC as a whole, had established itself as the most powerful political force in the Belgian Congo. Lumumba's leftist views and the growing momentum for independence alarmed the Belgian authorities. They were deeply concerned about the future of their financial interests should Lumumba's MNC gain power. The rise of Congolese nationalism, fueled by participation in World War II, international influences, and the leadership of figures like Patrice Lumumba, set the stage for the eventual independence of the Congo. The struggle for freedom had reached a tipping point, and the world would soon witness the birth of a new nation. On January 4th, 1959, a political demonstration organized by Abaco in Leopoldville spiraled out of control. The colonial capital quickly descended into chaos with extensive rioting that took several days to quell. By the end, hundreds had died, sending shockwaves through both the Congo and Belgium. In response to the violence, King Baudin addressed Belgium on January 13th. He declared that Congo would move towards full independence without delay, but also without irresponsible rashness. Yet the Belgian government, led by Prime Minister Gaston Yssekens, envisioned a gradual transition that would take several years. On the ground, however, the situation was evolving far faster than the Belgian authorities anticipated. Across the Congo, resistance to colonial rule intensified, with many refusing to pay taxes, and in some regions, anarchy loomed. Meanwhile, Belgians lived in the Congo felt increasingly abandoned by Brussels, as they faced growing hostility from the Congolese population. In 1959, King Baudouin made another visit to the Congo, but this time the atmosphere was starkly different from his visit 4 years earlier. Upon arrival in Leopoldville, he was met with protests, including rocks thrown by angry citizens furious over the imprisonment of Patrice Lumumba, who had been jailed for incitement against the colonial government. The Belgian government, wary of being drawn into a bloody colonial war like France in Algeria or the Netherlands in Indonesia, decided to give in to the growing demands for immediate independence, despite concerns about the lack of preparation and the small number of educated Congolese elites. In January 1960, Congolese political leaders, including a recently released Patrice Lumumba, were invited to Brussels for a roundtable conference. In a surprisingly swift agreement, the Belgian government conceded to the Congolese demands, general elections in May 1960, and full independence, or dependa, on June 30th, 1960. In the lead up to the elections, three major political alliances emerged. These included a coalition of federalistic nationalists, the centralist MNC, led by Lumumba and Moise Teshombe's faction in Katanga, which focused on preserving regional economic interests. The elections produced a divided political landscape with both regionalist factions and nationalist parties like MNC gaining significant support. In the end, a compromise was reached. Joseph Kasavubu became the first president of the Republic of the Congo, and Lumumba its first head of government. As planned, just 5 months earlier, the Belgian handover took place on June 30th, 1960, at the Governor General's residence in Leopoldville, marking the official birth of the independent Republic of the Congo. But independence came with immediate challenges. Just 1 week after the handover, a rebellion broke out within the Force Publique against its predominantly Belgian officers. This sparked widespread disturbance across the Congo, with violence often targeting European residents. Within weeks, over 80,000 Belgians were evacuated from the country, assisted by Belgian military and United Nations forces. The Congo's independence, born out of sudden dramatic events, was a milestone in the decolonization of Africa. Yet, as the country took its first steps as a new nation, it faced immense challenges that would shape its future in unpredictable ways. So now we're going to go over to talking about the independence and the Congo crisis and so forth. So in July 1960, a rebellion erupted in Thiceville, spreading rapidly across the newly independent Congo. By September, a political crisis deepened as President Joseph Kasavubu and Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba declared each other deposed. The stalemate was broken with Lumumba's arrest. In January 1961, Lumumba was transferred to Katanga, a wealthy mining province that had declared independence under Moise Teshombe, backed by Belgium. There, Lumumba met his tragic end and executed by Katangan authorities. I have to mention that the Belgian and American, that is to say CIA, intelligence services were involved in this execution and murder of Lumumba. Decades later, Belgium officially apologized for its role in Lumumba's assassination, while suspicions linger about CIA involvement, driven by fears of Lumumba's leftist politics during the Cold War. They were essentially scared that Lumumba was going to tilt more to the Soviet Union. You can't really blame him either. The Congo faced a series of rebellions and separatist movements that seemed to shatter its dreams of unity. Belgian paratroopers frequently intervened to protect their citizens, while the United Nations maintained a significant peacekeeping presence. Stability only began to return by 1965 after the suppression of the Simba rebellion and the reintegration of Katanga into the Congo. In 1965, Joseph Désiré Mobutu seized power in a coup, marking the start of a 32-year regime. Initially, Mobutu was backed by Western powers, particularly the United States, for his staunch anti-communist stance during the Cold War. Mobutu launched a campaign of authenticity, renaming the country as Zaire and discarding colonial place names. Cities like Leopoldville, Elizabethville, and Stanleyville were renamed Kinshasa, Lubumbashi, and Kisangani. Early in his rule, Mobutu focused on consolidation and development, including the construction of the Inga Dam. Yet his policies took a radical turn in the 1970s. The Zairization policy, which nationalized foreign-owned businesses, led to economic disaster and the exodus of foreign expertise. By the 1980s, Mobutu's regime had become synonymous with corruption and mismanagement. I say it like this: the nationalization per se is not wrong, but if you don't have enough educated people, as I said in previous, as I said previously, obviously it's going to be hard to lead certain industries. So that's a problem. By the end of the Cold War in the late 1980s saw Mobutu lose Western support. In 1990, he announced a return to democracy but delayed reforms using political maneuvering to cling to power. Tensions peaked in 1990 after the Zairian army's violent crackdown on student protests at Lubumbashi University. Diplomatic ties with Belgium were severed, further isolating Mobutu. In 1997, Mobutu was ousted by rebel forces led by Laurent Désiré Kabila. Zaire was renamed the Democratic Republic of the Congo, marking the end of Mobutu's reign. After Kabila's assassination in 2001, his son Joseph Kabila became president. In 2006, the Congo held its first free nationwide election since independence, signaling a new chapter for the country. Even today, Congo's colonial history leaves its mark. Belgian ties remain visible in trade, education, and the Congolese community in Belgium, centered in Brussels' Matonge district. So now I would like to talk about the modern day Congolese crisis that we have today, how it started. So if we go through a timeline, Al Jazeera put up a pretty good timeline article here, starting with the Rwandan genocide and how that spilled over to the DRC. So the DRC crisis originally began as a result of series of post-colonial battles for power after independence from Belgium in 1960, which culminated in the assassination of popular leader Patrice Lumumba and a 3-decade military rule under dictator Mobutu Sese Seko. And we talked about this before. Ethnic tensions in Rwanda forced more than 300,000 people from the Tutsi minority group to flee to neighboring countries in the 1960s, particularly to the DRC. Some of those refugees regrouped and sought to seize power in Rwanda after the country gained independence from Belgium in 1962. In the early 1990s, sorry about that, my throat is kind of itchy. I had a little bit of aftermath of Corona here going on. In the early 1990s, the DRC saw a spillover of civil war and subsequent genocide in neighboring Rwanda. In October 1990, a civil war broke out after the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, a Tutsi rebel group led by current President Paul Kagame, invaded the country from its Ugandan base. And in April 1994, extremist Hutu militias attacked Tutsis and moderate Hutus, killing 800,000 to 1 million people over 100 days in what is now known as the Rwandan genocide. Hutus form some 80% of Rwanda's population. Kagame's RPF seized the capital, Kigali, on July 4th as Hutu genociders, troops, and former regime leaders fled to the DRC. An estimated 2 million Hutu civilians, fearing revenge and reprisal attacks, also poured into the country. Now, what led to the First Congo War of 1996 and 1997? Tensions rose between local Congolese tribes, Rwandan immigrants from the colonial and pre-1960 independence periods, and those who fled the war in 1994. Often local tribes battled Tutsis, but conflicts also existed with the Hutus, as locals feared they would be outnumbered. Earlier immigrants had rights to Congolese citizenship, but later immigrants were regarded as refugees, and many were housed in camps. Hutu militias who fled Kagame's rule to refugee camps in eastern DRC began to regroup to restore a Hutu government in Kigali. They launched attacks on Rwanda and also killed Tutsis inside the Congo. In response, Rwanda started to arm Tutsi militias inside the DRC. Across the DRC, many Congolese were resentful of Mobutu's corrupt rule.
rebel groups seeking to overthrow him emerged, including the Alliance of Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Congo, AFDL, led by the Laurent Desire Kabila, Rwanda, which accused Mobutu of harboring Hutu perpetrators of genocide, armed the rebels, and sent in Rwandan troops in 1996. On October 24th, 1996, the Tutsi-dominated AFDL in Kivu and troops of Rwandan army launched offensives in eastern DRC, sparking the first Congo War. Uganda, Eritrea, Angola, and Burundi, all Rwandan allies, joined the war. As you can see, there's a lot of rebel groups. There's a lot of different parties and even countries involved. So one of the reasons why I made this video is so I can learn myself about the issues that are going on in Congo, because a lot of people don't know, and it can be a hard time keeping up with the history here. Anyway, let's proceed. The AFDL seized power on May 17th, 1997, ending the fighting, and Kabila declared himself president of the DRC. But the Rwandan troops allegedly massacred Hutu populations, forcefully repatriated Tutsis, and took control of lucrative diamond and coltan mines in the resource-rich eastern region bordering Rwanda. So if we move forward to the 1998 until 2003 Second Congo War, we analyze the causes here. So after his climb to power, Kabila fell out with Kagame and started to unceremoniously force out Rwandan and other foreign troops still in the DRC. This alarmed ethnic Tutsis living in Congo and reignited tensions with local tribes. In response, Rwanda backed a new rebel group, the Rally of Congolese Democracy, RCD, which launched a revolt in August 1998 and started the Second Congo War. A parallel group, the Movement of the Liberation of Congo, MLC, formed to fight alongside RCD, also seeking to overthrow Kabila. As you can see, there's just multiple different groups that are being formed here. The DRC and rights groups claim MLC was backed by Uganda, which had also fallen out with the Kabila regime. Jean-Pierre Bemba, the present Congolese Minister of Defense, led the armed group that has now morphed into an opposition political party. Kabila's government armed Hutu refugees in the east fight back against Rwanda and the RCD. Government officials publicly incited Congolese people to attack Tutsis, leading to several public lynchings. The South African Development Community, SADC, of which the DRC is a member, deployed troops from Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Angola to fight RCD and Rwandan troops. In 1999, the DRC, Uganda, and Rwanda signed a set of ceasefire agreements, including the Lusaka ceasefire agreement in 1999 and the Luanda agreement in 2002, which were to see all sides stop military operations. The agreements also triggered the UN to deploy MONUSCO, United Nations Organization's stabilization mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. These troops were to monitor the peace process. However, fighting persisted in many areas like gold-rich Ituri, where ethnic tensions worsened by the war erupted into the continuing Ituri conflict. Now let's move on to how the M23 and other major rebel groups emerged. The arming and counter-arming of rebel militias by the Congolese government and foreign actors means there are now between 120 to 140 rebel groups operating in the DRC, mostly in the resource-rich east and northeast areas. Several peace agreements with some of these groups over the years were meant to see operations stop and fighters integrate with the Congolese army, but have failed to permanently end their activities. The latest was the East African Community led Nairobi peace process in June 2022 and the Luanda Roadmap November 2022. The most active groups at the moment are the M23, Codeco, and ADF. So if we analyze the M23 here, operating in North Kivu province, the group is named from March 20th agreement of 2009 when the DRC government under President Joseph Kabila, son of Laurent Desire Kabila, signed a ceasefire treaty with the Tutsi Majority National Congress for the Defense of the People, CNDP, one of the numerous groups of fighters active since the Second Congo War. In the agreement, the CNDP was meant to become a political party, and its fighters were to integrate into the Congolese military, FRDC. However, on April 4th, 2012, 300 CNDP troops revolted and, complaining of poor treatment in the army, they formed the M23, claiming to be fighting for Tutsis' rights in the DRC. In late 2012, M23 launched an offensive, seizing Goma and several other towns. A special UN force, along with FRDC, pushed the rebels back into the eastern hills on the border with Rwanda in 2013. M23 resurfaced in 2022 with violent attacks and has seized at least 4 towns in North Kivu. The group briefly withdrew from the occupied towns in January 2023 as part of the Nairobi peace process, but the ceasefire fell apart in October. The DRC accuses Rwanda of funding M23. A 2023 UN group expert report also found that Kigali finances the group. Rwanda denies the allegations. So let's talk about ADF. Originally from Uganda, the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, also operates in the eastern DRC. In the regions bordering Uganda, the group initially claimed to be fighting for an Islamic State in Uganda, where Muslims make up a minority of between 15 to 35%. It's not clear what boundaries the reclusive ADF wants to claim, but the group first settled in Buseruka, western Uganda, before it was pushed back into the DRC. But it has recruited along secular lines over the years. Interesting. An Islamic group that is based in Congo. Formed in 1996 during the First Congo War, it used a weak DRC as its base to launch attacks into Uganda. Ugandan troops used their presence in the DRC during the 2 wars to attack ADF fighters. The group went dormant in 2001 and resurfaced in 2013 and is now reportedly linked to the ISIL or ISIS. Codeco, the Cooperative for Development of the Congo, Codeco, was formed in 1999. So this is another rebel group, basically. During the Second Congo War and operates in eastern Ituri. It was initially an agricultural cooperative, but started to advocate for the Lendu ethnic group, who believed they were unfairly dominated by the rival Hema ethnic group. After a period of dormancy, Codeco launched offensives in 2017 and has continued to attack local civilians and Congolese forces. In February 2024, Codeco ambushed civilians, killing 15 people believed to be Hema, in likely continuation of the rivalry. The group has also targeted gold mines in recent weeks. Other actors also operating are several pro-government militias and Mai vigilante groups, jointly called the Wazalendos, fighting with the Congolese army. Some 40,000 Wazalendos have undergone military training since 2000 2022, where current President Felix Tshisekedi, a huge ally of Israel, by the way, called for young Congolese to help defend the country. There's also the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR, an ethnic Hutu group active since the final years of the Second Congo War and backed by the Congolese army. According to a UN experts group report. Some of its leaders took part in the 1994 Rwandan genocide. FDLR, FRDC, and Vazalendus have carried out extrajudicial civilian killings, sexual assaults, and exploited local communities, according to Human Rights Watch. So there are multiple rebel groups. I have noticed that they are also very ethnically based. They seem to be receiving support from Uganda and Rwanda, and in turn, Rwanda and Uganda are receiving military assistance from the United States and European allies. And they are using these rebel groups to plunder Congo, basically. And I assume that they're European or multinational corporations also get a cut from this plunder. That's how I understand it. But let's continue. What's the legacy of UN and regional peacekeepers? The UN peacekeeping mission MONUSCO is one of the most expensive and extensive UN missions in history, comprising 12,379 troops and up to 5,000 additional civilian personnel. Its 2022 budget was about $1.1 billion, but MONUSCO is deeply unpopular in the DRC, seen as having little to no impact. Yeah, often a lot of these like UN troops, I really don't know what their function is because they're not really doing much to uphold the peace. But anyway, in 2022, violent protests erupted, calling for its exit following renewed M23 attacks. At least 32 civilians and 4 peacekeepers were killed in the riots. Government officials, too, reportedly called for their exit. Well, and it's not just they don't do anything to quell the violence. They also, in many countries, I think there was in Congo as well, many UN troops were involved in sexual exploitation of minors and women, etc. So I'm not saying all of the soldiers do this necessarily, but there's a lot of corruption going on. So in December 2023, the UN Security Council voted to pull out MONUSCO a year earlier than planned. Despite fears the troops' absence would create security vacuums and more instability, a phased withdrawal will see 2,000 personnel leave South Kivu by April 2024 and the entire contingent leave by December 2024. Similar issues have plunged or plagued regional military missions in 2022. The East African Community, which the DRC is part of, deployed troops as part of the EAC regional force. The force led by Kenya was meant to facilitate the Nairobi process, a 2022 ceasefire agreement, by ensuring the withdrawal of multiple rebel groups from occupied territories in eastern DRC, including M23. But within months, the DRC government of Felix Tshisekedi accused the contingent of colluding with rebels and not launching offensives. The presence of Rwandan troops in the force also raised alarm in Kinshasa. Barely a year later, the troops are now evacuating. Yeah, so that seems to be the background of these rebel groups that are involved. So, what countries are involved in mining? The DRC's mineral resources are in the protracted crisis, with various armed groups battling for control of lucrative diamond and gold mines and using earnings to fuel wars. A few countries currently mine in the DRC, partnering with state mining companies. So China is one of them, and dominates the foreign-owned mining industry, with Chinese companies controlling 15 of 17 cobalt mines, according to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Switzerland, mining giant Glencore owns two copper and cobalt mines, Kamatu Copper Company, KCC, and Mutanda. And then you have the UAE, signed a 1.9 billion deal with a state mining company in July 2023 to develop four mines: tin, tantalum, and tungsten and gold in the turbulent east in Kivu and Manierna. And UAE is not only involved in Congo; they're also involved in Darfur. Suspecting a lot of people suspect that they are helping the RSF, because the RSF controls quite a few gold mines in this region. But anyway, let's move on. What's the impact of mining in the conflict? Well, as a lot of people know, or maybe don't know, DRC is home to some of the world's largest reserves of metals and rare earth minerals like cobalt, considered an essential in the lithium ion batteries that power electric vehicles, EVs. As much as 70% of the world's cobalt supply comes from the DRC. Coltan, used in gadgets like PlayStations and phones, is also plentiful in eastern DRC. Mineral resources have long been a factor in the protracted crisis, with various armed groups battling for control of lucrative diamonds and gold mines, and using the earnings to fund wars. Leaders of these groups have been accused of child labor in the mines and of attacking and exploiting mining communities. During the civil wars, Rwandan, Ugandan troops looted DRC's minerals, although only Kampala was forced by International Court of Justice to pay reparations to the DRC for the economic damage caused. A law in 2010 forced a U.S. law in 2010 forced companies to evaluate where their minerals are sourced and reduce conflict minerals, or so-called blood diamonds, from global supply. Now, I highly doubt a lot of those companies have done that, but whatever. And even if they have, I really don't believe any major consequences have been, uh, been dealt to these companies. But anyway. A few countries currently mine in the DRC, partnering with state mining companies. China dominates, with its companies controlling 15 out of 17 cobalt mines, according to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Chinese concessions are in return for infrastructure projects in the DRC. Now, there's a difference between how China operates in Africa and the West. Now, I'm not saying all Chinese companies are like, good, because there are private Chinese companies that do bad things as well. I think it's important to recognize that. But in general, when China does business on the continent, they give something in return. They build roads, hospitals, schools, universities, railways, highways, all types of infrastructure, right? And they don't interfere in the local politics or national politics within that country. Unlike the West, which forces you often to, which forces African and third world countries to privatize, for example, their industries, their water supply, and if they don't, they overthrow their governments via coup d'états and whatnot. And a lot of Western politicians, they're also known to be very arrogant. They come in with an attitude that you have to accept their liberal values and whatnot. So that's the major difference that I would say is there. But anyway, there's also Switzerland-based Glencore, which owns two copper and cobalt mines, Kamutu Copper Company, KCC, and Mutanda. Lastly, the United Arab Emirates signed a 1.9 billion deal with the state mining company in July 2023 to develop four mines with tin, tantalum, tungsten, and gold in the turbulent eastern Kivu and Maniema provinces. So, how is the conflict affecting Kigali Kinshasa relationships? Um, that is an excellent question. Tensions have escalated between President Tshisekedi and Kagame since the M23 resurgence in 2022. On the campaign trail for re election in December, Tshisekedi called Kagame Hitler and threatened an all out war. Kinshasa, as well as the UN and the US, have accused Rwanda of supporting M23. Kigali, in turn, blames Kinshasa for arming the FDLR, one of the Hutu militias that sprung from the civil wars that was attacking Rwanda. So the FDLR is Hutu, whom are of a Bantu descent, I believe, which the majority of the Congolese population are. So, yeah, I think, again, they seem to be supporting these ethnic groups out of, these rebels out of ethnic lines. But anyway, it's one of the Hutu militias that sprung from the civil wars and that's attacking Rwanda. Anti-Rwanda protests erupted in Goma in February, with demonstrators burning Rwandan flags as well as those of Western countries seen to be backing Kigali. There are fears of wider regional conflict stemming from the deteriorating relationships. Already, Kenya and Kinshasa had a heated row in December 2023 after a Congolese opposition candidate met with Congolese rebel forces in Nairobi. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to continue on the topic of Congo in another video, but I think we're going to end it here. This has been a pretty long project of mine. So I'll see you in the next one.